To many, this is a hard saying. Take up thy cross and follow after Jesus. But it will be much harder for them to hear the saying, Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire. The whole of our life, brethren, is embracing the sacred cross of our Redeemer, the cross of suffering and the cross of mortification, to submit our wills to the will of God, to fulfill his commandments, and to do his good pleasure. And this costs us suffering. We have discussed the 3 pillars and the 3 weapons of the spiritual life, and we've discussed the virtues, faith, hope, and charity, as well as the cardinal virtues, prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance. All of this is to fulfill the will of God, day by day, moment by moment. And this costs suffering. Suffering is the overarching means in the spiritual life, in all the 3 pillars and all the 3 weapons, in the 7 virtues, suffering. Why is this? It is because we are attached to creatures. We are attached to creatures, and so fulfilling the will of God costs us suffering, because taking away the comforts of these creatures makes us suffer because of our attachments. The invitation, for God would have thee learn to suffer tribulation without comfort, and wholly to submit thyself to him and to become more humble by tribulation. For God would have thee learn to suffer tribulation without comfort, and wholly to submit thyself to him and to become more humble by tribulation. Brethren, the suffering that we submit ourselves to is of 2 kinds. Voluntary suffering, which is the mortifications and the fasting and the disciplines that we take upon ourselves. And then there is the more perfect suffering, which is the involuntary suffering, the suffering that we encounter day by day, which is contrary to our wills, which is contrary to our attachments. All of this suffering, when received with a patient spirit, is pleasing to the Lord. And God gives us true comforts in himself and doing his will. And this, brethren, this is the advancement in the spiritual life, is the suffering. This week we're going to continually talking about effeminacy and the way that we get attached to creatures, attached to pleasures. And this suffering is what cleanses us from that attachment, from that effeminacy, embracing the cross. So we're going to talk about how that cross plays itself out in the 3 pillars of the 3 weapons in the spiritual life and overcoming sin. Brethren, this cross is the cross of salvation, the cross of suffering, the cross of daily mortification. Take up your cross, brethren. Be not afraid to take up the cross, lest you hear the words, Depart from me, ye cursed. Hope rather in suffering and offering up that suffering and the cross to Christ, to hear the words, Well done, good and faithful servant.